Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving deep today
Yeah.
into something I think we all deal with, laziness.
Oh, yeah.
But no guilt trip here. We're actually looking at an episode of Learn English podcast. I think it was called Stop Being Lazy. You're wasting a lot of time. And I gotta say, it's got some really good stuff in it.
Yeah, it's interesting. They don't just jump into like the quick tips. They actually go into the psychology. Like, why are we procrastinating in the first place?
Right.
Which helps us kind of reframe laziness. It's not like a moral failing.
Right.
It's often like a symptom of something else.
Okay, so basic question.
Yeah.
What is laziness? Like why does it seem so universal?
That's a great question. And the podcast hosts, Leo and Gwen, they actually point out that it's not like just being sluggish. It often stems from some deeper causes. So like lack of motivation.
Yeah.
Or feeling completely swamped by the size of a task.
Yeah.
Or even fear of failing.
Oh, I've totally felt that. Like frozen, when a project is just huge, like my brain just says, nope, that's so common.
Yeah.
And there's actually research to back that up. Like studies have shown that when a task feels too big, we just avoid it altogether.
So how do we break free? Did they have strategies?
One of the big things is breaking down those goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
Right.
So they use learning English as an example. So
Yeah.
instead of like being fluent in a week,
Right.
they say, hey, commit to just 10 minutes a day.
Oh, that's good. That's like building a habit, right? It's
Yeah.
like instead of climbing a mountain, it's one step.
Exactly. It's about building that momentum
Yeah.
and the confidence, like those small wins.
Okay.
And speaking of habits, they also talk about routine.
Ah, okay.
One example is waking up at the same time every day, which they say is good for your physical and mental consistency.
Interesting. I've always struggled with routines,
Me too.
but I can see how that would like reduce decision fatigue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Research actually shows almost half of what we do every day is habit, not conscious choice. So if we create good habits around work, we're kind of automating our effectiveness even when we don't feel like it.
I like that. It's like pre-setting yourself up for success,
Yeah.
even when you're not feeling it. But okay, realistically, routines are hard,
Oh, yeah.
especially now with digital distractions everywhere.
Totally. Did they address that?
Did they? Yeah, they did actually. They're like, yeah, smartphones, social media, those notifications, they kill productivity.
Ugh, yeah.
In fact, studies show people spend like 3 hours a day on their phones.
It's a lot of time.
Imagine if you got like even half of that back.
Wow.
That's kind of scary. I know I'm guilty of way too much scrolling.
Me too.
So they suggest like putting your phone in another room while you're working.
Yeah, have you tried that?
Oh, yeah. I've tried it. It's surprisingly effective.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to be willing to do it, you know?
Oh, definitely. It's about being more intentional with the tech, not letting it control us.
So we've got like breaking down goals, routine, taming the distractions. But I'm curious about the mindset of laziness. Can we like shift our thinking to be more productive?
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
And that's something they talk about too. One of the hosts, Leo, he mentions a just start mentality.
Start. Okay.
The idea is sometimes we wait to feel motivated,
Yeah, I do that.
but often doing something is what makes you motivated. So
Uh-huh.
instead of waiting for the feeling, you just dive in.
So it's like tricking your brain into being productive.
Kind of. And once you start, even if it's small, it builds from there.
Okay. Yeah.
They also mention rewards, even small ones, like give yourself a treat after a task.
Ooh, I like treats.
Right. It reinforces that positive feeling, makes you want to keep going.
I am so on board with that. There was this one thing they said, though, that I was like, wait, what? They talked about productive procrastination.
Productive procrastination.
Can that be a thing?
Right.
Procrastination is like the opposite of productive.
Exactly. But it's not just randomly putting things off. It's more about choosing to delay some tasks. And in that time, you work on something you're more energized about right then.
So instead of forcing myself on something I hate, I switch to something I'm excited about.
Yeah. And the idea is, overall, you actually get more done because you're using your energy better.
I don't know if I'm convinced, but I'm definitely curious. Have you ever experienced productive procrastination?
I've definitely put off stuff I don't like, but productive is a stretch. Maybe it's about how we think about it, like seeing those moments as chances to tap into different energy.
Yeah, like finding that balance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we got to remember the bigger picture here.
Right.
The podcast emphasizes knowing why you're lazy.
Yeah, we talked about like no motivation, feeling overwhelmed, fear of failing.
Right. So what are your triggers?
Ooh, good question. What works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly.
So it's figuring out what works for you.
Exactly. That's where self-awareness is so important. The more you know yourself, the better you can tackle laziness. It's like making your own productivity plan.
Love that idea. It takes the pressure off of trying to fit into some like one-size-fits-all approach,
Yeah.
and it lets you like experiment and find what works. Speaking of what works, they had this one tip that really stuck with me. Set clear, achievable goals.
Oh, yeah. They were big on that. Like, break the big tasks down into smaller steps. We talked about that with the learning English example, but how do you think that applies to other areas of life?
Well, okay, let's say you want to write a book. Instead of thinking about writing thousands of words,
Oh my gosh, yeah.
you could set a goal of just writing 1 page a day.
That feels so much more doable.
Right. It's way less intimidating.
Exactly. And as you hit those smaller goals, you build momentum, which then fuels your motivation. It's a positive feedback loop.
Success breeds more success.
Yes. And remember the rewards. Little treats can go a long way.
I am here for the treats. Always. But what about those days when motivation just vanishes?
Oh, I have those days all the time.
We all do. It's like even the tiniest task feels impossible. What do we do then?
That's where that just start mentality comes in.
Right.
Push past that resistance and just take action, even if you don't feel like it. Sometimes starting something is what actually sparks that motivation.
You know, I always wait for inspiration before I start something.
Oh, yeah, me too.
But I see how that just leads to more procrastination. Maybe I need to try this just start thing.
I think it's worth a try. It's like pushing a heavy object. It's hard at first, but once it's rolling, it's easier to keep it going.
Perfect analogy. That's exactly how it feels. Okay, but even with the best intentions, there are still distractions. Especially now with technology, it's like a constant battle for our attention.
Oh, tell me about it. It's like we're surrounded. What did the podcast say about dealing with that?
They had a few suggestions, like put your phone in another room or use website blockers. Have you tried either of those?
I've tried the phone in another room thing.
Yeah.
It definitely helps.
Yeah.
But it takes discipline.
It does. It's about being mindful of your habits, making conscious choices about your time and energy.
Yeah, like taking control of your environment rather than letting it control you.
And that's where mindfulness comes in, right? I've heard that a lot, but I'm not sure I totally get it.
It's about being present in the moment, paying attention to your thoughts, feelings, and actions without judgment. So for productivity, it's about noticing when you're getting distracted and refocusing,
Yeah.
and being kind to yourself when you do get distracted.
Oh, that last part is important.
Yeah,
We can be so hard on ourselves.
absolutely. So to sum up, we talked about understanding the causes of laziness, setting achievable goals, breaking down tasks, managing distractions, and cultivating mindfulness. True. And we talked about that just start mentality, rewards, and being kind to yourself. It's been a great deep dive into all this, but what would you say is the key takeaway?
I think the biggest thing is laziness isn't a character flaw. It's often a symptom of something deeper, like no motivation, overwhelmed, fear of failing. It's about addressing those root causes and also realizing there's no single solution. It's personal, you know? What works for one person might not work for another. Experiment and find what works for you.
I totally agree. It's about finding what helps you be your most productive.
Yeah.
But before we finish up, one last question.
Okay.
We've been all about overcoming laziness, but is there ever a time when a little bit of laziness is actually a good thing?
That is a fascinating question. I have a feeling this is going to lead to some really interesting insights.
Yeah.
But we'll have to save that for the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
Welcome back, everybody. So, where were we? Oh, yeah. Could a little bit of laziness actually be good?
Yeah. We've been talking about how to fight laziness, but now we're saying maybe there are upsides. That's kind of weird, right?
It seems counterintuitive, yeah? But think about it this way. When we step back from always being busy, when we're a little lazy, it gives our minds space to wander, to make connections we might not have seen before.
So you're saying those times when we're not intensely focused on a task, those could actually be where creativity comes from.
Exactly. There's actually research showing that boredom and daydreaming can help us solve problems in new ways.
You know, that makes sense. I've totally had those moments where the solution to a problem just pops into my head while I'm doing something else, like taking a shower or doing the dishes.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Our brains make those surprising connections when we're relaxed, not forcing ourselves to focus.
But how do we balance that with actually getting things done? It seems like a blurry line between good daydreaming and just plain procrastination.
Oh, absolutely. It's a balancing act for sure. And that's where self-awareness is so important. Knowing when those lazy moments are actually helpful And when they're just us avoiding something we need to do,
So it's not just letting ourselves be lazy, it's being intentional, even with our downtime, making sure those moments of relaxing are actually doing something for us.
exactly. It's about making space for both
Yeah.
focused effort and relaxed attention. Both are needed for productivity and well being.
Okay, that's really helpful. It's not about being on all the time. It's about a rhythm. Work and rest, focus, and letting your mind wander. So maybe a little laziness, used the right way, can actually help us be more creative, solve problems better.
That's the idea. Now, going back to the podcast, I thought it was interesting how they didn't just focus on like external strategies. They also talked about the internal stuff that makes us lazy.
Right, we talked about that. No motivation, fear of failing, feeling overwhelmed. But is there anything we can do about those internal things? Did they have any advice on that?
They really stressed understanding why you feel those things. Like if you're always overwhelmed, is it because you're taking on too much? Are your expectations realistic? Or maybe you're not good at asking for help.
So it's not just the feeling, it's figuring out where it's coming from.
Exactly. Once you know the root cause, you can make a plan to deal with it. So, overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to say no more, or break down projects into smaller pieces, or get better at managing your time.
That's all super practical. It's like taking charge instead of just letting things happen to you.
Right. And this is where self-care comes in.
Yeah.
They talked about doing things that recharge you, that make you happy.
Makes sense. Hard to be productive if you're burnt out. Taking care of yourself physically and mentally is super important for being productive in the long run.
Absolutely. And it's not just vacations, it's the little things every day.
Yeah.
Meditating, walking in nature, listening to music, hanging out with people you care about.
I love all of those, making those little moments a priority, even when you're busy. But I gotta admit, sometimes, even when I know what to do about laziness, I still don't do it. Like there's knowing and then there's actually doing.
Oh, I feel that. Theory is one thing, practice is another. And I think that's where accountability comes in. They mentioned having a support system, a friend, family member, mentor, coach, someone to help you stay on track.
Having someone to check in with, to share your goals with, that can be really motivating. It's easier to stick with it when you know someone's rooting for you, keeping you accountable.
Definitely. And it's not just about cheering you on. It's also having someone to help you figure things out when you hit those roadblocks.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, dealing with laziness, it's a journey, not a quick fix. There'll be times you slip up, procrastinate, lose motivation.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's not about being perfect, it's about making progress.
Exactly. And being kind to yourself when you mess up.
Yeah.
Remember how they talked about self-compassion? We're often so tough on ourselves, but beating yourself up just makes you feel worse, less likely to get back on track.
So true. We got to treat ourselves like we'd treat a friend with
Mm.
kindness, you know?
Exactly. Setbacks are normal. It's part of the process. Learn from them, adjust, and keep going.
So it sounds like dealing with laziness isn't just about strategies, it's about mindset too. Self-awareness, self-compassion, resilience.
You got it. It's about knowing you can change, even if it takes time. But, thinking back to the podcast, they said something I want to circle back to. The importance of finding your why. Remember that part.
Yeah, they said it's easier to stay motivated when you know why you're doing something. Why is this goal important? What are you trying to achieve?
Right. Having that strong why can help you push through the laziness, keep you focused on the bigger picture.
Oh, I totally agree. When you're feeling blah, remembering why you started can be super helpful. It's like reconnecting with what inspires you.
Exactly. It's about your values, your passions, what you dream of.
So maybe when we feel lazy, it's a sign we need to reconnect with our why. Like we've lost sight of what matters, and that's why it's hard to stay motivated.
That's a great point. And maybe that's where some of that productive procrastination we talked about can actually be helpful.
Oh, interesting. You mean taking time to reflect, explore, figure out what we really want?
Exactly. Maybe those lazy times are actually chances to step back. Make sure we're on the right path, doing things that truly matter to us.
Wow, I like that way of thinking about it. Maybe those moments aren't lazy at all. Maybe they're how we grow, how we figure out who we are.
Maybe they're key to a life that's more intentional, more fulfilling.
I love that. But I'm just noticing we're almost out of time for this part.
I know, time flies when you're deep diving. But don't worry, we'll be back to wrap things up soon. Stay tuned for part 3.
All right, back for the final part of our deep dive on laziness. Wow, we've covered a lot.
We have from the reasons we get lazy to strategies to even saying maybe there's some good things about those less productive times.
Right, and we left off talking about how those lazy times could actually help us, reconnect with what really motivates us, make sure we're on the right track. What do you think about that?
I think it's a really important idea. We're always supposed to be on, achieving, pushing ourselves. But what if those times when we just be, those are actually super important for us, for being happy and successful?
It's like giving ourselves permission to pause, to think, you know,
Hmm.
and make sure we're not just moving, but moving in a direction that matters to us.
Exactly. And maybe that's how we find a way to be productive that actually lasts. Not about wiping out laziness completely, but understanding it, using it to our advantage.
So instead of the enemy, laziness could be like a friend, a signal to check in with ourselves, recharge, remember our why.
Love that. It takes the pressure off. We can be curious about those downtime moments, be kinder to ourselves during them.
Speaking of kindness, we got to remember sometimes what looks like laziness is actually something bigger, like
Hmm.
depression, anxiety.
Oh, absolutely. If you're struggling with always feeling tired, no motivation, hopeless, please reach out for help. Mental health is just as important as physical health, and there's nothing wrong with getting support.
100%. And we also got to remember everyone's different. We have different energy levels, different capacities for being productive. What feels lazy to one person might be totally normal for someone else.
Right. Compare ourselves to others, and we set ourselves up for trouble. We got to figure out what works for us individually.
So, as we wrap up this whole deep dive on laziness, what's the one thing you hope people take away from this?
I think the biggest thing is laziness is complicated. It's not just willpower or forcing yourself. It's knowing the reasons behind it, finding strategies that work for you, and giving yourself permission to rest, recharge, and remember why you're doing all this in the first place.
And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of laziness used the right way can actually make us more insightful, more creative, and help us live lives we're happier with overall.
Who had thought laziness could be so deep?
That's what deep dives are for, right? Finding the unexpected in the things we think we already know.
That's so true. Well, I think it's about time for us to wrap up.
Yes, but before we go, we want to leave you with a challenge. Think back to all the things we talked about. Which strategy really stood out to you? Pick one and try it out this week.
We'd love to hear how it goes. Share your experiences with us on social media or leave a comment on the website.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.